That brings me to
Yeah.
my second question for you, which is, what did you find and what troubled you about litigation in family law?
A part of really what troubled me with litigation is it's truly designed to be an adversarial process, right? So it's designed for individuals who have issues to present their positions and to have a judge make those decisions. Well, that works well for like contracts or for, criminal law. In divorce, right? We are fundamentally tearing apart a family because we are requiring them to take a position and to lay out evidence,
Hmm.
most of that evidence being why the other person was a terrible human being or, all of the things that really people really shouldn't right know about somebody else in the way that is required in litigation. And so what I was finding was that people were navigating the divorce space and they were coming out worse than when they came in. And
Right.
that's not even just financially, because in many ways that was happening as well. But they were so torn apart. They didn't have the tools or the knowledge base to know how to proceed going forward because for so long, here they had a lawyer speaking for them, thinking for them, writing for them, doing all the things, right?
Hmm.
And so at the end of the day, what we were kind of leaving people with were all of the pieces and then say to them, okay, now you got to go clean it
Right.
up. And so for me, it really became very challenging as I started to see my own clients really kind of um, morph into people who were not really prepared to take the next step forward post divorce.
Hmm.
And I wanted a process that allowed them to do that. And I found that mediation was that process without kind of, going down and getting too far into the conversation. I will also say that COVID
Mm.
threw this entire practice on its head because this was the first time in history where the courts had shut down and there was no indication of when we were going to get back going.
So, do
And
you
for
think it had a role in forcing more people to mediate who were more acrimonious, perhaps, in the system?
100%, 100%, because here you had cases that just couldn't move forward because they were litigation cases, right? We've got
Right.
no judge, we've got no court, we've got lawyers who can't really get anything done because there's no judge. The cases that were going forward were those cases that were mediation, right?
Mm.
Because you could quickly pivot to say, okay, I understand that we were all used to being together, in person around the table. Let's all hop on Zoom, right? We can still problem solve. We can still move forward. And so it was in that moment that cases started to really pivot and we really started to see a transition in the practice that really demonstrated that mediation or alternative dispute processes were really the best way to keep a case moving forward for families. This also, I think, came right on the heels of when certain jurisdictions, my own included, where courts were starting to really kind of force parents to really try to work out issues directly themselves by making mediation mandatory for parenting matters. So as the thought was, you as parents are the best people to decide holiday parenting time
Right.
or, summer parenting time before running to a judge. I want you to try it. So you had that coupled with then, these cases that could keep going, whereas in litigation they couldn't.
Hmm.
And so I think it really shined a light on mediation in a way that we now are really seeing most people are choosing to mediate as an option first before even considering the traditional kind of litigation
Right. And
process.
some of the benefits of mediation for those of you listening or watching is, It's usually faster, right? It's cheaper.
Yes.
You have
Yes.
a neutral and you are there, usually without your attorneys, or there can be attorney assisted
That's
mediation,
right.
right? Where you are with your attorneys. And that neutral, their job is to get an agreement, right? They're not representing either side. And I always educate the women I work with, you have to have a review attorney, right? You have to have somebody reading it and redlining it and looking
Yes.
out for your interests, and so does your spouse, right? So those are the advantages. I often get the question, well, how long does mediation take? Well, that
Yeah.
depends on so many things, right? Like the number of assets. How
Yes.
well are you going to get along? Are you going to fight over Bobby's baseball camp for 2 months, or
Right.
right?
That's right. It is, arguably it's faster. And I love that you said, people immediately are like, well, how long is it going to take? Let's put it in perspective, right? So you can go to a mediation session and let's just say it's, a full day session. So 6 hours or 8 hours, right? And you're laser focused on knocking out the parenting schedule,
Right.
right? Okay. I can promise you that in the litigation process, that could easily be 6 months. So those six
With a
hours
huge price tag, right, Kimberly?
with a huge price tag, those 6 hours, even if at the end of the 6 hours, you've only worked through, the major holidays, and now the mediator is saying, okay, let's do another session, fine, right? Because if it takes two sessions, maybe even three, now we're talking about 12 hours, maybe,
Hmm.
15 hours total. That is in no comparison to the amount of time that it will take to get the same result if you were to go the traditional route. So it's a time saver. It certainly, can be a money saver. But I 100% though want people to understand that mediation is a problem solving space. And so you have to be wanting to come to problem solve, right? You can't come and
Hmm.
say, I have to have the exact schedule that I want. I have to have the exact amount of support that I want. You've got to be able to be open to consider other options and to be open and flexible. But if you're stuck on positions, then the traditional process is really where you're going to find yourself landing.